What do you got for us?
Okay, number one, going that winning close games is a mindset. The two sides that I've got in the radar with this are Collingwood and Port Adelaide. I think that they've done it extremely well, but it's about the positivity of the best outcome rather than being worried about the worst. And Collingwood and Port have done it extremely well in recent weeks. It's powerful when you refuse to give up. That's a great summary of it. I'll go to Collingwood first. In their since round 9 last year, they're 19-4 with 23 games. There's been 17 of those games that have been decided by 2 goals or less, and they've won 15 of those. So when it gets tight, they've found a way to win, regardless of personnel, regardless of circumstance, regardless of whether you've played great footy or you haven't. So that's a great sign for them. I see the same thing in Port Adelaide and what they've done 3 of the last 4 weeks. They've played West Coast in the middle. They've had 4 really good wins. They had that last quarter comeback against Sydney when they looked like they were out of it. They did it at their home deck against the Western Bulldogs, and then they've backed up with it again against St Kilda. When it had to be done, they played their best football late in games and were able to find a way with an energy and with a purpose and with a focus on the possibility of winning. What the positive aspects of winning, and I think Collingwood go to this as well. It's not from a fear of losing. It's not from saving something. It's not from protecting something. It's the capacity to attack and to open up when it's there to be won.
Yeah, there's definitely the attitude behind it, but there's also, have you done the work in the preseason? Are you match hardened? Are you conditioned to be able to perform at your best?
Yes.
When you are fatigued? And there's also structurally, and there's some coaching that plays in it. How do you get your best players and your most impactful players in the positions that they need to be when the game's on the line? I think so. They're not on the bench. You haven't subbed someone out. You've got the right mix on ball. You know, that mix that has the greatest strike rate and greatest success for you. So definitely attitude, but there's also some physical and some coaching traits that go into it as well.
And yes, no, there's no doubt there's a method, and there's the belief of that method, because there are plenty of different ways to go about it. But if the players believe in it, then when it is tested, when it does come to the crunch, and when it has to occur right then and right there, then that's when the players have the confidence to be able to go to it. The second one is a slightly different one, and it was GWS's close win over Sydney. And sometimes it's not just method. Sometimes it's not just teams. Sometimes an individual can drag you over the line. The ball went down into the forward 50, and Toby Greene was actually part of getting it into that part of the ground. Dermot Brereton called on the call. He goes, "Oh, that's a really bad sign for Sydney, because it's going to give Toby Greene time to get down to the stoppage." Now, Dermy knows him pretty well, has worked in at the Giants. You don't need to have been in there to know that if it was going to happen, it was going to be there. So it's not unlike sort of Michael Jordan getting the shot on the buzzer for the Chicago Bulls way back when. Only there's 5v5, and it's a lot easier to get the ball into the hands of that player in a basketball game than it is in a game of 18v18 footy. But
what he did, and he's probably hasn't been renowned for his footy IQ, has just been pure talent and pure brilliance. What he did at that stoppage, and if you look at it from behind the goals, he's got Florin as the matchup. He goes and tries to make a 2-on-1 on Warner. They both then drop off him because Florin thinks, well, Warner's got him.
Yep.
I'm not going to have him. But Warner thinks Florin's got him, and it just gave him half a metre, and that's all he needed. I hope we see him on the big stage again, Toby Greene, in big finals. I think it's unlikely probably to happen at the Giants, which is a real shame, but he just gives unwavering effort, and that effort is matched by pure brilliance, and that was on display. 4 goals, 22, and he is. So I've got I did my top 5 best players in the game.
Yep.
I've got him at 4.
Okay.
Charlie Cameron, Bont, Curnow, Toby Greene, and I think Dangerfield is still 5, but he's a freak. Bucks,
no defenders in that. We might have to come back around.
What's point 3?
Point 3 for me is North and West Coast. We're not going to learn a lot from the opponents or the opposition in those games in this middle part of the year. At the very least, it's already shown that they're largely uncompetitive. Carlton and Melbourne had the jobs and did the jobs well on the weekend, but I don't think we learned anything about those two sides after those results. You're not really thinking that you're going to have learnt so much about your team when you come up against an uncompetitive unit or uncompetitive units like North and West Coast. Carlton took 29 inside 50 marks to 4. So you know that you've got double ups in that. It's not just single entry. You're taking a mark inside 50, and the opposition haven't got the wherewithal to stop the next kick that goes to a better position. So that's how you get to 29 and 4. Melbourne took 16 to North's 9. There was a little bit more competition there, but those two sides aren't going to give us any idea on how other teams are travelling, and we're going to get some big results.
They nearly had
for the course of the year.
150 more uncontested touches, Carlton, than what West Coast had. It's a disaster for the AFL. Thank goodness there's a rolling fixture after round 15. It's and you've got to think about that with Tassie coming in as well. So there's two completely uncompetitive teams. There's going to be another one coming in. It distorts the whole of the competition. So the teams that have double up games against these two, West Coast and North, get such an unfair advantage. And we can go through a few of those. Essendon get West Coast and North twice. So there's just 4 wins given to you, gifted there, whereas other teams don't. So the whole integrity of the competition is at stake here. And it was pretty confronting to watch both of those teams play. And I've got a bit more to say about Alastair Clarkson and North Melbourne after this. What about the Tigers?
The number 4 is the Tigers, and from a difference of position with North and West Coast, Richmond have got a lot of players out. They're 1 win, 1 draw, 5 losses, which is not where they would have seen themselves. But you can see with Richmond that, and especially with the way that their coach communicates, that there's still a lot of fight in them. He's not giving up on anything, and they're going to bite, scratch, and work for anything that they can get. There's ownership of their situation there. There's an acknowledgement of the things that are going to be tough for them. But what I sense in those words, in that energy, in the way that he's carrying himself, is we won't see Richmond ever fall into a North Melbourne or a West Coast situation. I just think that they've got that many young players in the side at the moment, Richmond. They've got a couple back which help them. Soldo coming back in stiffens them up, but it's still his first game back. When Lynch comes back in the side, this is my next point. Mitch Lewis for Hawthorn made Hawthorn look entirely different. So I think a Lynch for Richmond makes that difference for them. Do
you think they overestimated where they were? Well, clearly they did, because you're not going to give away the amount of draft picks and capital that you've given away for 25 and 26-year-olds like they did, if they didn't think they were a chance to win it this year. Not just make the finals, win it.
I've got no doubt that they thought that they were adding to see whether Cochin, Rewalt, potentially Lynch, Martin could be a part of some short-term success. But I also believe that Taranto and Hopper they see as players that are going to be part of their midfield through the next dip and then as it comes back. Now, whether that timing's right, you can only ever really judge that in retrospect. All right, the 5th one I've got, and it'll be short and sharp as such. Tall forwards, the competitive beast in front of the ball is such an important role in the game. Tom Hawkins, round 1, health and fitness versus his round 7, health and fitness. Chalk and cheese. Isn't it? And I've got no doubt, clearly the rest of the team around him helps him do what he does. But I think when I reckon he was at a 4 out of 10 in the first couple of rounds. So Geelong weren't able to build their front half game around a guy who's been so accountable to them and so important for them. But now he looks like he's up and about, and funnily enough, Geelong look like they're flying again. But back on, so Tom Hawkins has kicked 22 goals. That's 4th in the comp after his 8 on the weekend. And Jeremy Cameron's taken a lot of focus, but Tom Hawkins is out and out star. I thought Dixon's role, just to go through him quickly, Dixon's role, I don't know whether he would have been selected in that team if you were coming up against a side who didn't have as good a defence as St Kilda, because you needed to be able to go long down the line to a contest. And I reckon Charlie Dixon played at about 70% fit, but his little taps and his smothers and his tackles and just got involved at the right time. And he's a bit of a spiritual strength and force for them as well. Mitch Lewis for Hawthorn in his first half, 9 marks, I think. Kicked 1 goal, 4. Could have been anything. But you just think, well, if he plays a block of 6 or 8 games in front of that offence and with that young team, then we'll find out what Hawthorn have got the capacity of. But I think they're sort of on the way up. Charlie Curnow, obviously, with his 9. What about Peter Wright for Essendon? Would he help them? Tom Lynch back for Richmond. Max King for St Kilda. What if Freo actually had one on their list?
Yep.
They don't have one. So I think in the end that the tall forward, he just does all the grunt work. We're talking about the big units to do all the grunt work for their teammates. Myercheck is an underrated one for Collingwood. English has turned into that player along with Norton for Western Bulldogs. And Max Gawn, they're trying to turn Max Gawn into a front half contested beast so that in the aerial situations so that they can build a ground game in the front half off. It's a fascinating watch because I don't think you can underrate the contribution of a big man in front of the ball.
I'm interested in whether North Melbourne fans see it the same as myself or whether you agree with Alastair Clarkson that performance was better than what you've shown in the last 2 weeks. There's missed tackles, players being outmarked, Melbourne just waltzing the ball through the middle of the ground, outran, outworked. Some of the stuff was extraordinary, Bucks. Is that spin? Like, what's he trying to do there with his message to his players and the supporters? Because it was, I just didn't see it that way clearly.
I thought that, when you've got a squad that's still developing, it's going to be really difficult to keep the narrative externally if your performances are poor. So I think it was really clear, like the first 2 rounds, they were able to find some energy, some belief and some system around how they wanted to go about it. The system only lasts as long as the opposition try and test it, pull it apart and challenge it. And I think that's when you find out how deep the players' belief is of that or the capacity to be able to execute a plan. And North were always still going to be on their way.
We didn't expect miracles at all from North.
No, one thing
we expected effort.
One thing I have noticed is there's whether it's coached or not, is that it's a bit of a seagull sort of sheepdog type mentality around pressure. So it's don't close up, just try and maintain that front layer, which. And I don't know if it's coached or especially from their backs. I could see that they won't lose their position to come and compete and contest at times. So I don't know whether it's coached or whether there's a balance that's not been met. But I would have thought that there's times when I've just seen North players sort of sit off sort of 2 or 3 metres rather than going and tackling at hips. And it might be around the tackle stuff at the moment. It might be something that Clarko's trying to set up that's a little bit left field, but it's not resulting in great footy in the last couple of weeks.
If I'm a supporter, I don't want to hear that. I want to hear the truth and not spin. What does the result say more about which team, Bucks, you're going to kick us off this morning?
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask you, way back to Friday night, the Saints versus Port. Who does that result say more about?
I think it says more about St Kilda, and is there now a blueprint on how you can break them down? So clearly the tactic from Port Adelaide was to match them around the ball, but when you get your opportunity in offence, go quickly, and it doesn't have to be pretty, but just go fast, get the ball to those one-on-one situations inside 50 and deeper if you can break that first line. And also there was a thought that don't get into a basketball game with them. Don't make it up and back. If you feel like the game is going too frenetically, just slow it down and be prepared to possess the ball. And I thought Port Adelaide tactically, did it pretty well. So we'll see if the other teams can do the same against St Kilda. Brisbane absolutely smashed Fremantle in every metric. It was a domination. Who does the result say more about?
Yeah, they did. And I'm going with Fremantle on this. We knew that they are not in sync. They're not at one with their game plan. They had 194 handballs and 187 kicks. So the intent was to try and flick the ball around to create some time and space to then run the lines. But they were unable to do that. They only got inside 42 times compared to 62. So Brisbane were dominant from a field position perspective. And the Dockers are just left with a lot of questions on how they're going to find their best mix. They're not the defensive unit they were at the beginning of last year. They're struggling to move the ball. There's a few considerations there for them to fix.
Forward line's a mess.
In the next 4 weeks, yeah. Sydney Swans and GWS, the Battle of the Bridge.
Sydney, because their once heralded mantra of being really difficult to play against and difficult to score against is evaporating, as is the season. So the season's quickly disappearing for the Swans. They haven't really beaten anyone of quality. Like, I look at their wins. Gold Coast, Hawthorn, Richmond. They're all teams that are down the bottom of the ladder. Smashed last week against Geelong, and there were some personnel issues. But on every metric, they dominated this game of footy and still lost at home. Too predictable with their ball movement going inside 50 and still too Buddy Franklin-centric, and they target him too often, which is predictable. So their season must get back on track and quickly, otherwise they're going to miss the finals, which would be a big story. The Western Bulldogs, comfortable winners, particularly after halftime against Hawthorn. Who do the results say more about?
I'm going to say the Dogs. I think they've really been able to nail down the way they play. I thought Hawthorn were a handful early, and with Mitch Lewis in front of the ball, and the energy and the intent that they'd taken off their Adelaide performance, the Hawks, into this game. They dominated Western Bulldogs in the area that they're normally strong, contested ball and clearance. So, I mean, they had 83, sort of had nearly 30 more contested possessions at half time, but Western Bulldogs had done enough to keep themselves in the mix, and then they imposed that style as they went on. Got some players that are in great nick. Norton to hit the scoreboard was excellent. English was a little bit more quiet, but they're just more balanced. Bontempelli had a quiet one, but that says a lot for what Western Bulldogs are building in terms of their confidence in the way they're playing. Yep. More efficient in offense and defense, and they didn't need their two standout players in English and Bontempelli to have cracking days for them to be able to win. Melbourne Demons or the North Melbourne Kangas?
It says more about North Melbourne, but I feel like I've had my say enough over the weekend on the pitiful performance that was North Melbourne, particularly in the first 5 minutes of that game. So I'm going to say Melbourne for their hunger, because this looks to me like a really hungry group, and that result was done in 5 minutes. But their contest work, their run, their fitness, their hardness, and their desire to be great, I think is shining through from Melbourne. So Geelong are the best team in the competition. Melbourne might be second. Collingwood might be third, and Brisbane, and then it's a little bit of daylight after those four. But Melbourne are in a really good position to win the premiership this year. On a similar note, Carlton got it done by 108 against West Coast. Who does the result say more about?
Yeah, I'm going to keep this short and sharp. It says more about West Coast and their issues, both personnel and execution. They're a long way off being a competitive AFL side, and they've been there for the large part of the last 18 months, unfortunately. We didn't learn anything about Carlton, I don't think, on the weekend, because they're just the competition.
The one thing I learned,
pressure wasn't there.
There's one little nugget from the Carlton game, and it's the use of Sam Walsh. I love it when he's getting the ball in the front half of the ground. So we're talking about their midfield mix and whether it's too dour and whether there's a bit of sameness. He's the one point of difference in that midfield. I'd love him to be a centre bounce forward player. And I know he's a connector with his running ability, and he helps you on transition, but he had 11 score involvements, and a lot of his touches were kicking the ball inside 50, which I loved.
It's no surprise that the ball spent most of the time
I
there,
understand
so that's where he's going to get them.
So I wonder if there's a little nugget that you can take out. Maybe it's not 35 for Sam Walsh. Maybe it's Toby Greene, 21, but
my question there is he an elite finisher? I think he's a very good user, but I don't think he's an elite user.
Is Petrarca an elite user though? But his possessions are damaging.
He probably does 3 or 4 things a game that no one else can do in terms of hitting targets or biting off.
Would you say DeGoey's an elite finisher?
Yes, he is.
You would?
Yep.
Okay.
Essendon and Cats, we've got 3 to go, the Sunday games.
Yeah, the Cats are the best team in the competition, and that was the case yesterday. And there's only so much that can be said about that. I think there will be a few shutters going through the competition over what they've done in the last fortnight, building nicely into the season. We've spoken a little bit about this one, but it was Gold Coast by 24 against Richmond.
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to say Gold Coast. I just think they've been able to come down. They've had a couple of solid performances at Marvel now, and I look, they're backs against the wall. Both of these teams going in, probably more so Gold Coast. You can't afford to lose it because you know that it heaps pressure on you. We just spoke to Ben King about the momentum that they're looking for. They're without Miller, who is their hardest runner, and as we spoke about, their spiritual leader. But we also heard about Holman, playing that role, and the fact that they won a game that they should have won, had to win. and got the job done. So it's sort of, in the end, it's probably the end result that speaks volumes for what they were able to do, because they did control that game for the most part. Adelaide or Collingwood, mate?
Adelaide for me, and I wonder whether at the end of the year they're going to look at this season of wasted opportunities. So they've lost 3 games where they've kicked 10-16 in round, 12-18 in round 1, 10-16 in round 2, 7-16 in round 7. So that's 3 games that, expected scores, all of that you'd look at that they should have won, and that's a lot. Now, if you look at the draw that they've got, they play Geelong, St Kilda, Western Bulldogs and Brisbane in their next month, and they've lost 3 games through inaccuracy already. They've 4 wins, should be 7 with a tough month to come. So I just wonder whether at the end of the year Adelaide will miss the 8 and look back and go, goal kicking.
Well, so you've been positive about them?
I'm really positive about everything that they are doing. They are a top 6 team in this competition, but they've lost 3 games. That's a lot. I mean, you got to win 12-13 to make the 8. They've lost 3 on inaccuracy. Tough month coming up, but they're a good side. I just wonder whether they're going to look back and go, we had an opportunity to finish top 4 or top 8, and we missed it on the back of some poor goal kicking.
Well, there's no doubt that this next little patch is going to be tough for them, but maybe we find out even more about them in this month than we know to now. Their injury profile is as good as any. They've been, they've a lot of players have played a lot of games of footy, so like all 7 of the games. So they've been fairly settled and fairly well structured. They're playing with great energy. Now they come up against some of the better teams in the comp. We get a really good look.